Let's go to Van, who's our next caller. Hello, Van. You're up next.
Hey Bart, how you doing?
How's it going, Van? Where are you playing out of?
Playing 251K cap out of good old Parks Casino.
251K representing Michael G at the Parks. 251K at the Parks. Okay.
So we have King of Clubs, Jack of Clubs, and under the gun 1.
And how deep are you, by the way? What's the effective stacks?
1K effective.
All right. So 1K effective hero with King of Clubs, Jack of Clubs from +1. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Under the gun, who's an OMC, raises 20, and we call.
So UTG to 20. Hero to the immediate left of the UTG. You say he's like an OMC type?
That's correct.
So hero flats with King Jack of Clubs from +1. Now, obviously, again, we always talk about that you're incentivized to 3-bet to drive the field out behind you, but there certainly are situations here, it's against a 4x open, where you might feel like you have a playable hand, but maybe it is not good enough necessarily to 3-bet. Did you ever consider folding?
No, folding's not an option. So yeah, the first inflection point is whether or not I should 3-bet. And at the time, I opted just to call because up until that hand, I had been 3-betting him a lot and getting him to fold. So I wanted to rein it back just a little.
Well, the interesting thing about, I mean, I understand what you're saying about that. And sometimes like I have that subconscious urge to, well, I've been raising a lot or 3-betting a lot. So now if I have like one that's cuspy, and what I mean is like, partials, say 50-50, well, now I'm just going to call because, I've been 3-betting a lot before. But if he's not going to 4-bet you, then it doesn't seem to really matter, right? You drive off the field anyways, and he's just going to call, and he's probably going to check to you blind on the flop.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, you could certainly get into a situation where you don't want to 3-bet. The times that I will take cuspy hands and call with them is because I feel like the opponent might 4-bet me, and I don't want to get 4-bet necessarily with a playable hand. But okay, so you decide to call.
Yep. So then the button calls, and the button's going to be the main villain in this hand.
Okay.
Small blind calls, big blind calls, and we're 5-way to head into a flop with a pot of 100.
Good old live poker. By the way, how typical is it that it's going very, very multi-way in these games?
Pretty typical in single raise pots.
Yeah, which is, again, why. I mean, it is the reason that you are a little bit incentivized to 3-bet. But I mean, you can still play these hands multi-way. It's just you can't realize your equity, obviously, as well. I think a lot of times people get concerned they don't want to play multi-way because they don't know where they're at in their hand. Like they might think like, oh, I'm out kicked or something like that. I think it definitely has more to do with the fact that you just can't realize as well because you have to defend tight multi-way. So $100 to the flop and hero from +1 with King of Clubs, Jack of Clubs. Okay.
Flop is Jack of Diamonds, 10 of Diamonds, 7 of Clubs.
Jack of Diamonds, 10 of Diamonds, 7 of Clubs. So you flop top pair, right? Okay.
And it checks to the button who...
Wait a minute. Wait. You washed over that very, very quickly, Van, by saying it got checked to the button. So UTG checks, right? Well, small blind and big blind check, right?
Yep.
UTG, the preflop raiser, checks. And now it's on you.
Yep.
And you have only one guy behind you, right?
Yep.
Just the button. So
just the button.
You decide to check?
I checked.
And why is that?
I don't know. It's probably a bad check.
I'm not saying that it's a bad check. It's just you washed over it very, very quickly. I mean, most of the time when you're talking about OMC types, now there can be exceptions, but most of the time, a lot of OMC types love to protect their hands. Now, could be one of those exceptions because it's super multi-way in the sense that like they play so few hands. They don't want to get like a bad beat with like aces or kings or queens. So they're going to bet the flop here on a Jack of Diamonds, 10 of Diamonds, 7 of Clubs board a lot. If you believe with what I'm saying here, then that means they don't have those hands, okay? So maybe it's a lot of high cards like ace, king, ace, queen. Now, obviously the small blind and the big blind are checking somewhat naturally, I'm sure, to the OMC person. But this board is pretty wet. There's a lot of draws out there. I actually kind of want to make protectionist vet / value bet anyways. And this is kind of like the great thing about like a typical 2-5 live game. Like if you got raised here on the flop by like somebody in the blinds, you can just mostly fold out without question. Now, if you're up against opponents that are sort of structuring their bluffs correctly, and you don't want to bet fold, like you think your hand's too in between, like it's too strong to bet fold, and you know that there is the chance because of board texture that you might get raised, then you're supposed to put that type of hand into like sort of the check category. But because the live players don't bluff enough or don't have that type of bluffing frequency based upon the texture, you can take a robust bet fold type of strategy. So I would mostly bet here. I think I would bet here a lot because I'm not concerned with the OMC guy. Now, if you put a Euro guy or some GTO All-Star guy, as Nate said in his blueprint course, like from under the gun, I might check more often because of the fact that the GTO All-Star guy from under the gun might be checking range here 4 ways. Just because he checks doesn't mean that he doesn't have anything, that he doesn't have you beat. But I think with the OMC guys tend to fit into that type of category. That's just my take. But okay, so you decide to check, and then the button checks as well?
No, the button bets 55.
Okay, so the button bets 55. Okay.
Small blind calls, big blind folds,
Mm-hmm.
UTG folds,
UTG folds, okay.
and hero calls.
All right, so the button bets 55. Small blind calls, big blind gets out of the way, UTG gets out of the way, which is kind of interesting because you'd think if UTG had like high cards like ace king, he might peel here for one, but he decides to fold out. And now it's over to you. So the pot is what, 210, 55 for you to call. I mean, I would say kind of like as played, you probably just, there isn't a whole lot to do here, but call. I think, the button's range is kind of undefined, but there's a lot of turn cards that can come. I mean, I would call here. If I check the flop, I'm going to check call.
Okay.
Yeah. Is that what you did?
I did. Yep.
Yeah. All right. So hero calls. And we are at 55, 165, 265 to the turn, right? 265 to the turn?
That is correct. The turn is a jack of spades.
Interesting.
Very.
So the turn's the jack of spades. So you make trips. Okay.
What would you do here? Because I checked.
Well, so the small blind checked, right? To you?
That's correct. Yep.
So this is kind of interesting in the sense that I don't find myself here in this spot all that much. But if I did check call, now, remember, if you were behind on the flop, you're still behind here on the turn, with the exception is if someone had bottom 2 for 10-7. Like if you're behind to ace jack, you're still behind. If you're behind to a set of sevens, you're behind to a boat. If you're behind to 8-9, you're still behind, right? But I will say though, that the fact that another jack comes out lessens the chance that somebody else has ace jack. The fact that you also checked the flop after the pre-flop raiser checked, I think that this is important too. It's not like you naturally checked the OMC. The OMC checked and you checked. The fact that you checked after him lends me to actually feel like I want to bet here because I actually think people might not necessarily believe that I have a jack if I check call lead. And they might call here with any type of showdown value moving to the turn, like with a 10. That's number one. Number two, my concern here is that if I put myself in the button spot here and I have bet the flop and I was betting a draw, I had diamonds. Again, it's jack of diamonds, 10 of diamonds, 7 of clubs, turns the jack of spades, right? Let's say I had diamonds. Let's say I had queen 9. Let's say I had king queen, something like that. Because the small blind called on the flop next to act, I'm pretty much checking all of my draws now on the turn. And then you overcalled here too. I'm not so concerned about you necessarily, even though you actually do have a jack now. But I'm concerned more about the small blind. Like I think any competent player here, when they bet the flop on the button and get 2 callers, especially next to act on the flop, is going to check through all of the draws. So if he's got a draw, he's going to check through here a lot. Now, if it was just heads up, like say the small blind hadn't called, say the button bet and you check call, and I'm still the button, and the turn's a jack and now you check, yeah, I would still fire a lot of draws. But when the small blind calls the flop, now I'm checking through all my draws. So it's a combination of, I think your line doesn't necessarily, it kind of looks funky and non-believable, and you might get called by a lot of showdown types of holdings by leading. And number two, I think that guy in position is going to be taking a lot of free cards if you check. So that's why if I found myself in this spot, yeah, I might be doing a lot of a leading in the middle.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So then something.
What did you do?
So I check, and
okay. Hero checks.
Yeah. I played this really passively. So something strange really happens. The button bets 80, and the small blind folds.
So, by the way, Got Your Home Ball says, so you want to telegraph your, what did he say? So you want to telegraph that you have a jack. I actually don't think it's telegraphing that he has a jack. He checked after the preflop raiser. After the preflop raiser checked. I'm talking about Van. And it doesn't matter because the guy's going to be checking through all his draws, which you don't want. So anyways, all right. Small blind checks, hero checks, button bets 80. Small blind folds. Okay.
Yep.
Uh-huh.
So we call, but do you think you're ever check raising here?
Well, now, here's the thing, Van. If I thought that the button was going to be checking through with most of his draws here, but now he bets, then probably no, I'm not going to raise, right? Because now he probably doesn't have many of his draw. I mean, maybe he overbluffs a little bit, right? But I would said that if you put me on the button and the small blind called next to act on the flop, I'm going to be checking through a lot of draws. So now I probably would continue with the passive line. You're still losing to hands, right? You're still losing the hand. And the other interesting part about this hand, though, too, as much as I like to burn people, and I talked about this in an earlier type of, I talked about this in an earlier hand. If the river comes a brick, you can actually still play a check call here because the guy might actually value own himself with trip jacks, with queen jack and jack nine, which you beat because you've played it so passively. He doesn't think that you have a jack, and you're also still behind to some other hands. So as played now in the small blind fold, yeah, I would probably call. So hero calls.
Yep.
Yeah. So hero calls, and now the pot is 425.
That's correct.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
River is the 9 of hearts.
9 of hearts. So jack of diamonds, 10 of diamonds, 7 of clubs, turns the jack of spades, river's the 9 of hearts. It puts a one-liner out there to an 8, and it brings in king, queen, right?
Yep.
Okay. So, I mean, I definitely checking.
Yep. Hero checks.
Oh.
And then button uses a pretty chunky sizing. He bets 350.
Well, what's interesting here is that those hands that I talked about that you were beating, if he did have a jack, like queen jack and jack 9, you're still beating queen jack, but I think queen jack checks. And now you're losing to jack 9. So now you are behind to all the hands you were behind to anyways, if he had flopped 8, 9, or a boat, 10s, 7s, whatever, jacks up that turn into a boat now. I mean, I kept saying that I think a lot of the draws check through right on the turn against two people. If he was betting king, queen, he has now gotten there. And there's a one-liner here to an 8. So you would basically be just praying that he had, and by the way too, that he had some sort of busted front door flush draw.
Right.
The other interesting thing about the flush draws is that if you take a look at what hands people play with flush draw, suited hands in terms of the high cards, right? King, queen, which is a straight. Queen, I mean, I don't know. So what else is out there here? King, I don't think he's got much. I mean, if he had 8x of diamonds, that now is a straight. So you're basically hoping that he has a missed, ace 6 of diamonds type of holding.
Missed draws, maybe a worse jack, but I feel like any jack there just checks.
Button will have more bluffs, assuming competent player. If button's good, I'm calling. I don't know if Bob Giorgio caught the beginning of this hand where I said if you put me on the button, I'm checking through a lot on the turn when the small blind calls next to act, and then it goes call, call. I mean, I suppose somebody could make the argument that Van had played it so... Again, that small blind next to act call, though, should be so strong that it just seems to me that the draw portion of... Yeah, again, I go back to like me thinking about like live streams and how much commentary that I've done on live streams, or just put yourself, like if any of you guys are the button and you bet like 5-6 of diamonds on the flop after it got checked to you, first of all, are you even betting that 5 ways? It's kind of a dry flush draw, or like ace-6 of diamonds. But even if you did, right, the nut flush draw, you get the small blind to call you next to act, and then you get Van, our hero, from +1 to call behind. Are you betting the turn on a jack with diamonds when it gets checked to you? I think almost every competent player is probably going to be checking through there, which is kind of why it's a little bit concerning. Now, pot odds 350 and a 425. You're getting obviously what, like, over 2-1 here.
Yep.
Something like that. I don't think anyone's going to fault you for sometimes like playing a hand this passively and calling. I just don't like it. Not that it's not that I don't like, I'm not talking about your line. It's just I don't like the spot. Like, I think you're beaten here a ton.
Yeah, I mean, in game, I realize that my hand is very under-repped, but given this game and this player pool and the lack of any sort of bluffing frequency on the river, I ultimately decided to fold.
So hero folds. Did you get a reveal?
Yeah, so when I was cashing out, I asked him, what he had. First, he was joking around. He said I had a bluff, but he wound up having Jack 10, and he was pretty surprised that I folded my hand.
So he told you that he had Jack 10.
Yeah.
So he smacked it.
Yep.
Button has Jack
he also had a really low VPIP the rest of the session, so
10. He was locking it up.
maybe, but he didn't seem like the type to bluff those spots. So I think I believe him.
What's interesting here, Van, is that if you had bet the flop, I think that, I don't know if he necessarily raises on the flop. So let's say he takes the call line with Jack 10. And now you've got trip jacks on the turn, right? So you bet again.
Yep.
And maybe he slow plays it because he's got the absolute nuts and he wants to tie the small blind in. And now on the river, it's a 9, and you're like, fuck. Now you probably have to check, and then it's almost like a game of chicken, like whether you thought the guy would be bluffing here, at the end with king queen coming in. It would have been interesting. It might have played out the same way.
I think it actually would have been easier if he took the call bet line, because when I see that, that's usually going to be really nutted. But the way that I played it here, I came really close to calling, but I just didn't think I was going to be good there enough of the time, even getting 2-1.
Yeah, I agree with you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Appreciate the call.